Australia, meet the biggest and most luxurious Mazda ever sold here, the CX-90. Replacing the outgoing Mazda CX-9, Mazda's new flagship starts at just over $74,000 before on-road costs, topping out at almost $100,000 before on-road costs. That makes it the second most expensive Mazda ever sold in Australia, behind the 1995 RX-7 SP sports car. Now, it's not due in showrooms until August, but I'm lucky enough to have a very quick glance at a pre-production US spec left-hand drive model so I can have a good sticky beak. So stick with me and I'll show you everything about this car, including the very plush interior. Let's check it out. The Mazda CX-90 will be available in a choice of 3 model grades: Touring, GT and Azami. From launch, you'll also have the choice of 2 powertrains. The first is a 3.3-litre 6-cylinder turbocharged petrol engine, outputting 254 kilowatts and 500 newton meters. The second is a 3.3-litre 6-cylinder turbocharged diesel engine, outputting 187 kilowatts and 550 newton meters. Both use a 48-volt mild hybrid system to give the engine a boost at low speeds and improve fuel efficiency. Power is sent to all 4 wheels through an 8-speed automatic transmission. Pricing starts at $74,385 before on-road costs for the petrol touring grade and rises to $95,185 before on-road costs for the petrol Azami grade. A plug-in hybrid CX-90 is still under consideration for a local launch at a later date. So I'm in the top spec Azami Mazda CX-90, so as you can imagine, everything is top of the range in this car. But I will say one thing I really like about the CX-90 is that no matter which model grade you buy, you're getting leather seats. Of course, on the Azami, it's this buttery soft Napa leather with suede inserts as well. You've also got some lovely suede on the dash. That, I think, is part of a $5,000 options package, which also turns the second row into captain's seat. So I'll take you back there in a minute. We can check those out. But it's obviously, it's familiar to any Mazda owners in this interior, but it's just elevated. So it feels lovely and sumptuous. All the touch points are really luxe. This leather steering wheel looks fantastic. It's finished in the two-tone as well as part of that options package, which is something a little bit different, I think. Along this fairly wide center console, there's also a few storage options. So quite an elegant wireless phone charger down here. You've also got a nice hidden away cup holder section here behind a little neat lid that slides, and this butterfly console as well with 2 USB-C ports inside. Of course, this is a US spec car, so some things may change for the version we get in Australia, but it's pretty close to finished. One thing I don't particularly love, the panoramic glass roof, I think could be bigger. I've certainly been in some cars recently from a lower price point that have massive glass roofs, and this one also only sort of opens up halfway, so I'll just pull it back, but oh, the car's not on, so that's not going to work, duh. But yeah, I think it's sort of probably not as visually impactful as I was expecting in this very luxe Mazda, but really I'm being quite picky with that. Now, on the lower grade CX-90s, you get a 10.25 inch infotainment screen. Of course, on the higher grades, it's this massive whopping 12.3 inch screen. The interesting thing about Mazda is they're persisting with this rotary dial controller. They have sort of made the decision that it will become a touchscreen when you're using Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, both of which are available via a wireless connection in the Mazda CX-90. But I do think it's kind of funny because you're toggling between 2 ways of using the screen, and I think their argument is that it's a little bit less distracting and a bit more intuitive to use the rotary dial while you're on the move. But for me, I think it's kind of strange to have it set up for one thing while you're in CarPlay and for something else entirely while you're in the native infotainment screen. But still, it does look fantastic. It's very premium, and the graphics, again, are kind of familiar to Mazda owners. They won't look particularly upgraded or different, but certainly comfortable and familiar. Climate control is managed out of this very long row of buttons down below the screen. So you've got seat heating, seat ventilation, steering wheel heating as well. So really you're equipped for all climates. And it's just a kind of luxe, comfortable, elegant, refined presentation in this cabin, which I think is what we've come to expect from Mazda. And I like to see them using a little bit more of varied finishes on the front seat and the dash and the center console as well. So pretty comfortable place to be, I've got to say. And we will now head to the second and third rows to find out if it's the case back there as well. On the top spec Azami grade, you have the choice of adding one of two packages. Each costs $5,000 and swaps the second row of seating for captain seats, turning the CX-90 from a 7-seater to a 6-seater. The SP package fitted to my test car adds tan Napa leather seat trim, a suede dashboard panel, a two-tone steering wheel, heated and ventilated second row captain seats, and a second row centre console with storage. One big call out in the CX-90 is of course how wide these doors open. So I'm starting to see this a little bit more in large SUVs, and it's particularly great for parents who are loading and unloading kids, but also just for people who like ease of access. So lots of clearance to get in. There's also thoughtful touches like inbuilt sunblinds on the Azami grade here, and it's also a very well appointed back seat, I've got to say. So you still get that lovely suede finish in the doors. These are the captain seats. So this is a $5,000 optional extra, only available on the Azami grade, and that swaps of course the 3-seat row in the middle for these 2 seats here plus this center console. So if you ask me, the big benefit of captain seats, I would have thought, is the clearance to the third row and the easy access. But of course, with this center console here, it's kind of removing that access to the third row. But that's fine. You get storage, you get cup holders. This center console bin is actually pretty big. So for all your knickknacks or your kids' knickknacks, if they're sitting back here, that's a good place to hide those away. Nice big door bins. You've also got a separate row of climate controls down here for the middle row, and they've got seat heating and seat ventilation as well. So that's really handy and nice for middle row occupants. I've got the seat in my regular driving position, which I do see a little bit further forward than most, so I will say that, but obviously leg room, knee room, head room, everything is pretty capacious. So as you'd expect from a large SUV, lots of comfort and room to move in this second row. Now, one of the other interesting things in this car are the ISOFIX points. So obviously there are ISOFIX points on both of these seats, but it's also interesting to see that there are some extra ISOFIX points in the third row. So we'll head back there and check those out now. Now I'm in the third row of the Mazda CX-90, and you'll note actually there is actually an extra set of ISOFIX points back here. So theoretically, you could fit 3 child seats in this car using ISOFIX. The top tether for the middle row are over the back of these seats as well. And then you've got ISOFIX points on this seat only. So good to know for people who have 3 kids in child seats at the one given time that this is an option for you. Now as well, I've got the middle row seat in kind of a, I'm not being particularly generous with the leg room for the person in front of me, but it's sort of splitting the difference. And I've got actual foot room, not a lot, but an all right amount, a little bit of toe room. If I'm sitting all the way back in my seat, my head is about 1 centimeter from the roof. I'm 178 centimeters tall. So headroom is there, present and accounted for. It's just not huge. That's fine. 2 cup holders for each third row occupant, plus a USB-C port for charging your phone. Nice big side windows that let in plenty of light, and an air vent on either side. Interestingly, it's actually located down here next to my knees rather than roof mounted like it is in some other 3-row SUVs, which I don't particularly mind. If you can direct the airflow up, I suppose you can get that Beyonce hair wind flow going through your hair. But look, it's not a particularly huge third row, and I do wish there was easy access in between those captain's chairs in the middle, but they've done a good job of squeezing in solid leg room and knee room back here. I'm not going to call it huge, but it does the trick. I just want to show you the boot of the CX-90 really quickly before we head off on a drive, because according to Mazda, it's a fair bit bigger than the CX-9 it replaces. So on paper, this supplies around 608 litres of storage if you factor in the underfloor storage as well. And I think the Mazda CX-9 has only 230 litres of storage. Both of those measurements are with all 3 rows of seating in place. So that sounds like a lot. To my eye here, it doesn't look particularly massive with this third row of seats up. Of course, if you're using this purely as a 5 or 4 seat car in this case, then you'd have a massive boot to play with. But Even with the third row in play, it's still enough for a couple of rows of shopping and maybe a small dog. Under the floor here, I'll just quickly show you as well. There's a plastic compartment with sort of smaller compartments, a plastic cover with smaller compartments as well for bits and bobs. And under that again is a temporary spare wheel. So they've squeezed in a fair bit. You've also got a light over this side and a 12-volt outlet. And I just want to show you really quickly how to lower the third row from the boot, which is basically to pull this tab. That pops that headrest down, as you can see, and then it folds very neatly like this. And then to raise it again, it's the same maneuver. So pretty smooth, slick process when the headrest decides to cooperate. There you go. Never work with children, animals, or headrests, they say, I think. But otherwise, I think it's a fairly good boot with 3 rows in play and a massive boot with only 2 rows in play. Standard safety equipment for the CX-90 includes front and rear parking sensors, blind spot monitoring with vehicle exit warning, autonomous emergency braking with junction assist and pedestrian and cyclist detection, emergency lane keeping, and adaptive LED headlights. Helpfully, all grades get a 360-degree view monitor, but the top-spec Azami grade adds a see-through functionality that shows a tighter view of obstacles near the wheels and provides a wider field of vision. Importantly, the curtain airbags in the car cover all 3 rows. I also had the opportunity to briefly do some dynamic testing with the car's active cruise control, lane trace system and lane keep system, and was impressed with how measured yet accurate these systems were. When I veered out of the lane, it pushed me back in gently but efficiently, and the lane trace capably maintained the car's placement in the centre of the lane without requiring any steering input from me. The active cruise control with distance control also slowed quickly yet smoothly with no dramatic lurching. So I'm on a closed testing loop today to drive this car because it is a pre-production left-hand drive US spec car, which means it's not approved for driving on public roads, but that's great because this test track kind of mimics Melbourne's roads anyways. It's actually got tram tracks as well for the full authentic feel. And the first thing I can say about the CX-90 is that it does feel like a big, heavy, substantial car. However, it is equipped with a lot of engineering features that you would probably find on a sports car. So it actually feels quite performance ready and really capable from behind the wheel. So one of the things it has is called kinematic posture control. So that's borrowed from the MX-5 sports car. And essentially what that does is it applies a slight brake pressure to the inside rear wheel when cornering, which basically cuts through that body roll sensation you do tend to get in larger SUVs and provides sharper cornering and better stability. So one of the big standouts of this car is that despite its size, it feels very balanced and level on the road. It actually feels not as high off the road as I kind of anticipated it to feel. So I feel very steady, and even going around some pretty sharp bends at speed, I don't feel like I'm thrown off balance at any point, which is pretty impressive for a car of this size. I'm also surprised by the weight in the steering wheel, and I mean that in a good way. It feels a lot more sporty than some of the large SUVs I've driven recently, and that is a good thing, I think, particularly for when you're touring. So if you are going around bends at speed and tackling kind of country, rural freeways and things that you tend to do on a family road trip, it's quite fun, and the response is pretty immediate and direct, which is something I don't often find in a large SUV. Often large SUVs, to counteract the size, have this really light, overly light steering feel, I would argue sometimes. So you feel like you're kind of overcorrecting and you're putting in too much input for, not a huge amount of response, whereas this is pretty direct and sharp as well. Flick it into sport mode with a little switch down here, and basically it will hold gear for a little bit longer, but it also just sharpens everything up, so your throttle response is a little bit more immediate and it just feels a little bit more dynamic on the road. Another thing this car has is a longitudinal engine layout, and in layman's terms, which I'm a layman, a proud layman, that basically just means that the weight distribution is, nice and even. And Mazda's really put a lot of thought into making sure this car, which is a big car, doesn't feel quite so big on the road. Acceleration is really swift off the line. This is the most powerful mass production engine ever featured in a Mazda car. I'm driving the petrol at the moment. the petrol inline six, and it's super gutsy and torquey, even from a standstill, which is fantastic, and it maintains that power. I've been traveling at speeds of up to 140 kilometers an hour, and it never feels like it tops out at any point. It's certainly got those power reserves there, but the way it's delivered is incredibly smooth and very, very steady and gradual. And it's through that sort of 8-speed auto, which makes all the difference. Now I'm going around a really sharp bend here, which normally I'd be kind of nervous in a large SUV like this, but I am staying so level on the road. It's really quite something. I don't know about the visibility in this car. I've certainly been in large SUVs with a bigger glass house, and I'm a little bit thrown off, I will admit, by the fact that this is a left-hand drive car, so it does sort of take some getting used to, getting your bearings, but the body control in this car is pretty impressive for its size. Additionally, it's quite unusual to see rear biased all-wheel drive in a car like this. Typically, I think it's reserved for, I suppose, larger cars or even just more performance focused premium sports cars and things like that. And basically what it means is, again, you're getting the benefit and the security of the all-wheel drive when you need it, but without sacrificing on that touring performance. So this is kind of Mazda saying, okay, we've made this massive 3-row SUV, and yes, it's luxe, and yes, it looks kind of like a giant fancy bus, but if you are a driver and you like to drive and you appreciate the finer things behind the wheel, you don't have to miss out on those things. In fact, not only have we maintained them, we've elevated them over and above what you might expect from a car of this size, or even just a Mazda in general. So refinement's excellent. I did notice at speed I got a little bit more wind noise, and because it's a heavy car, I am aware of some sort of clunking noises occasionally going over the harder edges, but the main takeaway for me is how cushioned this car is from exterior noise, but just how level, steady and agile it is at speed for the fact that it is a large 3-row SUV. So they've done a really good job at that. The engine note isn't particularly exciting. There's a bit of an exhaust noise there. It's nice. You get the sense that you're driving a car with a little bit, with performance a little bit more front of mind than it is in other cars. But no, for me, the big win here in this car so far on this test loop is the handling, the cornering, the way it maintains its balance, the way it's never sort of thrown off center. And the steering feel is something I would probably expect from a car of either a higher price point or with a bit more performance prowess. So yeah, good on you, Mazda. Well done. So I'm going to flick it into sport mode now because I do want a little bit more punch from the accelerator. So I'm just going to pop it in there. Yeah, nice. And the display flashes red because, red equals sporty. Red means fast. Yeah, and this is even more agile than before, to be honest. I actually prefer the accelerator response in sport. Feels a little bit less measured, a little bit more immediate. I can't notice a huge difference to the steering. But yeah, I'm traveling like over 100 kilometers an hour, going around some corners. I wouldn't normally feel confident tackling even at sort of 70 or 80 kilometers an hour, and this car is doing a fantastic job. I will say that third row of seating with the headrests up leaves a very tiny field of vision behind me. I can't really see much, but that's all right. That's what you expect, and you'll have probably some people back there too distracting you, so maybe it's better to rely on the overhead camera when you can, because the people who go on the back seat are always the naughtiest in my experience. The ones blowing raspberries and sticking their tongues out in order to distract you. We don't need that. One more thing I will say is that it's not an overly cushiony ride, which I quite like. It does feel a bit sportier. We just went over some very sustained bumps in the road, so it's never uncomfortable, and the suspension is tuned really nicely to, I suppose, cut through any sustained harshness, but it's certainly not I don't feel disconnected from the road or really wobbly going around corners. I actually feel much more level and closer to the road than I would say in other three-row SUVs I've driven that do tend to feel a bit more top heavy. So it's a very balanced, quite a sporty ride in this car. The 2023 Mazda CX-90 isn't due in showrooms until mid-August this year, so there'll be plenty more time for us to explore how it performs and handles on local roads and to do more in-depth reviews. So make sure you stay subscribed to our YouTube channel so you can stay up to date with all of that content. And in the meantime, let us know in the comments if you think this car looks like it's worth that hefty price tag. Thanks so much for watching and see you next time.